Welcome to Early Communication and Multimodality with Dr. Rosie Flewitt, where we are exploring learning, literacy and communication across the life course. I'm your host, Dr. Kristiina Kumpulainen, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Drs. Iris Berger and Harini Rajagopal. Today we are excited to be joined by Dr. Professor Rosie Flewitt from Manchester Metropolitan University. Rosie is internationally recognized for her pioneering work on children's early communication and multimodal literacies. Her research has shown us that children don't just communicate through words, they express themselves through gaze, gesture, movement, images and sounds, weaving together rich modes of meaning-making in homes, classrooms and communities. Key works from Dr. Flewitt include her multimodal ethnographic studies, inclusive literacy research, and practice-oriented methods texts. In this conversation, we'll explore Rosie's scholarship on multimodality, her insights into how digital technologies are reshaping childhood communication, and her innovative research methods and methodologies that help us see more of how young children make meaning. We'll also hear how these ideas can transform practice, inform policy, and inspire more inclusive ways of thinking about young children, literacy, and multimodality. Well, Rosie, what first drew you to study how children communicate in multimodal ways?
Well, I think I've always been fascinated by the many different ways that people in general communicate, not just through words, but through their bodies, through gestures, through gaze. And one of my interests in that was because I studied modern foreign languages, so I often found myself unable to express myself in the words that the other people would understand. So I think I've always expressed myself in that way, to get out of the problem of not having a particular word or vocabulary. But for multimodality, I know exactly when I came across the theory, and that was when I was very busy doing my PhD and trying to make sense of the data I had, which I was trying to analyze from an applied linguistic perspective. And it wasn't working, because I was looking at children who were often silent in the setting. And I was trying to unravel how they would communicate. And I was really stumped. And then I came across an article by Dr. Leslie Lancaster in the Journal of Early Childhood Literacy. And it was in about 2001. And the article was called Staring at the Page. And I read the article and I just thought, that's it. This is how I need to be looking at the children I'm working with, because I can't understand what's going on through a linguistic lens. I need to look multimodally. And that was where I was introduced to the work of Gunja Kress, who was cited in Leslie's paper. So I recommend that paper. It's a very good one.
Thank you so much. How insightful. Thank you for sharing. We are next turning to multimodality, and it's Iris, your turn.
Rosie, how lovely to have you here with us today. So researching multimodally changes how we observe. And my question for you is, how does observing bodies in action change what we count as literacy in the early years?
So I think that, our bodies and movement are an essential part of communication, and especially young children. And bodies and movement are often the communication mode of choice for young children, especially in situations where they don't feel 100% confident, and they might be slightly reticent about using any form of talk. Also because if children have emerging language capacities, they might be reliant on a familiar adult to interpret the word that they're trying to say. And if they know that person isn't there, then they won't try. And so I think that we need to attend to the whole body of a child to really understand, what they are understanding, how they're expressing themselves. And also because bodies and movement are just part of communication. When children sing or when they vocalize, when they shout or when they sign, bodies are an integral part of that communication. So it's like the whole package. If you only look at words, you're only looking at a tiny bit of the communication sort of repertoire.
Thank you so much for that. And on that note, could you share a powerful classroom or home moment where a multimodal view revealed learning that traditional measure would miss?
Well, yeah, not just learning, but also communication and social interaction, I think, which is so integral to successful learning opportunities as well. And again, I sort of came across multimodality through my PhD data. So, quite early on in my academic career. And I was trying to unravel how a little girl who we called Tallulah in my PhD study, why she was electing to be silent in the preschool, and yet she talked a lot at home. And the preschool staff were very concerned about her, and were beginning to doubt that she had the linguistic fluency that indeed she did have. So I watched her a lot, and I watched her at the craft table, and they were convinced she didn't interact with other children. And I video recorded her, and then watched it with the sound down as well. And she was doing some painting with paintbrushes and a choice of paints and some water on the table. And next to her was a little girl who was a bit older than her, who was doing the same activity. And completely silently, they shared the brushes, they shared the water, they exchanged the paint colors, and they had little sideways looks at each other. So if you weren't on the words, there was nothing there to assess or show any sign of social interaction or learning. But if you looked at what they were doing very, very carefully, you could see that very subtly, Tallulah, who was also shy, was opening up to the little girl. And they were mixing, yellow and red to make orange. And one was doing it and the other was copying, and they were sharing their colors. So there was a lot of learning happening there, but it was happening silently.
That's so lovely. Thank you for sharing that story.
Okay, we are moving to section 2, and we are discussing digital childhoods and post-digital life.
Thank you, Rosie. That story of Tallulah is so powerful and so meaningful in so many ways. So thank you for that. My question, again, is trying to understand, I think, other aspects of your research. So thinking about from tablets to smart speakers, how do digital tools reshape early communication? And what practices help families use these well?
Right, that's a huge question. So I do a lot of research in homes where there are young children. And so over the years, there's been a steady increase in the amount of tech that we all have in our homes. And I think especially in the past 10 years, where things have become much more affordable and more compact and more sophisticated, there is a plethora of different technologies in the family home now. And so that shapes how children experience communication in many different ways. So the most obvious is the smartphone, where you can have video calls, which is quite revolutionary, really. We take them all for granted now, but it's only relatively recently in the history of mankind that we've been able to do that. And so that has made video communication so much easier for children to talk with distant family and even friends of the family as well. So there are lots of devices that we have at home as well, where, for example, lots of families have video doorbells, and which they control from an app. So if the doorbell rings, then the attention goes to the app, not to the place where the door is. And you talk to the person on the other side of the door through a phone app or through an Alexa app. And so it's that sort of, another element. There's a screen element, if you like, to communication. But then not all tech has screens, because you have smart speakers in the home as well, as you just mentioned. And a lot of parents are using smart speakers to play nursery rhymes and, to sing songs, to entertain the children and to sing along with. And so one of the words that young children are hearing very frequently is like Google or Alexa. And so that word is creeping into young children's early vocabulary. So what do we do about this? Is it a bad thing? I mean, that's the next half of your question, is what practices, can we engage in? So firstly, I think for parents, it's really important to reflect on how you use technology yourself, because whatever you do, that's what your child will want to do too. So if you use your phone at mealtimes or some other device, then that's what your child is going to want to do too. So you just have to think about whether you want to encourage that habit or not. And also just do things playfully together with technology, because then you've got good quality interaction, and good quality interaction is always a good thing. And follow the child's interests. If the child is interested in something, then pursue that interest. And if you can do it through books, you can do it through a walk, you can do it through looking something up digitally, and in lots of different ways. So don't be frightened of the digital, but if you're doing things playfully in joyful ways together, then it's just another type of activity that can add to your child's learning.
Thank you for that. Such a thoughtful response. Thank you. What have you learned about toddlers' tech talk? The way 0 to 3 young children signal preferences or curiosity or frustration with or about or through technology.
Well, I think we all recognize that because digital devices are quite powerful, and even very young children recognize that they are like a magnet for adults as well as for themselves. And so they do want to use them. And so if they're not allowed to use them, that in itself can be frustrating. So if you yourself use a phone or an iPad or whatever, or a smart speaker, and the child is not allowed to, that's going to be a frustrating situation for the child. So just saying no isn't, that's a frustration in itself. Many parents also find that if their children are given a device to use, then they have a problem taking that device away. And the child becomes upset when the device is taken away. However, if you use the device as a shared activity that has a purpose, right, we're looking at this, or, let's enjoy this together, then once that activity is over, it makes sense to stop using the device. And in those cases, there are fewer issues with the child actually not using the device. You just say, oh, let's do something else now. And that usually works okay. If the child is using a device on their own, it can be more difficult to get, to avoid those kind of difficulties of being separated from a device.
I love that. Thank you for that careful, nuanced answer, really. I love that. So where do you see the line between enrichment and overload in young children's digital ecologies?
So I think that's a really clever question, and it's important for parents and for all of us to feel more confident about the fact that if children's use of devices is purposive, there's a reason for doing it, and that reason will have a beginning, a middle, and an end, then that's fine. But if there's no particular purpose for a child to use a device, then that's potentially overload. Is it necessary? So overload can also come in the most unexpected places. So, for example, a lot of museums, especially science museums, have a lot of tech in them nowadays, and they talk all the time. So, you've got videos playing, you've got buttons you can press. So you get a complete overload of the senses, often in an environment like that. So this isn't just happening in the home. I find it actually very difficult in a lot of museums that have got a lot of interactive tech, and I think that needs to have more attention paid to what's happening to the audio, because it's actually quite painful to my ears to have 6 different streams of things in the same space as I am. I can't distinguish between them. And so I think that sometimes overload is more obvious than others. But if you're at home and you're just using the tech purposefully, and you finish doing the activity, so you stop using the tech, that's not overload. That's just purposive use.
Thank you. Brilliant.
We are now moving to segment 3, methods that see more. Rosie, you have greatly contributed to multimodal ethnography and inspired many other researchers who are interested in the literacies and lives of young children. Can you give us some advice? What does rigorous data collection look like when the data includes bodies, spaces, and all sorts of artifacts?
Well, I actually think that if you are an ethnographer, then it's about relaxing into the space rather than using rigor, almost. Because your role as an ethnographer is not to interfere with what's going on, but to try to understand what's going on. So I think the rigor comes from trying to just let things wash past you until you feel as though you are beginning to understand. So perhaps there is rigor in that you have to be very patient, and you have to be patient with yourself as well. So part of hanging around as an ethnographer is also about building trust with the people with whom you're spending time. And I think that building trusting relationships is what really matters as well. So it's not like you go in with a busy agenda and you have to tick things off. It's completely the opposite of that. So the word rigor doesn't sit very well with me in that respect. You just have to be patient, build relationships, and let the other people's worlds begin to overlap with your own understandings. And so it's a slow method of working with close observation.
Thank you. That's very, very valuable and insightful advice. Well, about interviewing young children, this is not an easy task. How to really invite children into conversation in interviews, and how to engage in this kind of ethical, relational talk?
Well, I suppose the first thing is to think, do I need to be interviewing a child exactly? Or am I learning a lot just from observing them? And then I think, rather than thinking with young children, rather than thinking of them like a traditional semi-structured interview that you might do with an adult, I would never, ever approach a child in that way. Partly because it would restrict what I would learn, because it would mean I was going in with ideas when the child is 100% likely to have much better ideas about their own life than I ever could. And so my interactions with children are always sort of relaxed and more like chats. But that comes from doing participatory activities with children, I think. You have to get them, if you can encourage them to get engaged in a task with you, perhaps you'll be alongside them and you'll just mimic what they're doing, and then you engage in play, and then you start to exchange words, and then you've got a little doorway, little opening door that you might be able to start a conversation. But I think that participatory approaches and the kind of work that Alison Clark does through the mosaic approach, by getting the children's perspectives, giving them a camera and asking them to take pictures, and then talking with them about those pictures, or videoing them and then sharing the video and see if they want to talk to you about what they were doing. And sort of say, I don't understand what was going on here. Can you remember? Things like that are a much better way of going about it.
Yeah, thank you for kind of reminding us about the importance of materiality and materials in kind of being important part of in our conversation or interviews with children. That's really insightful. I have a last question for this section. Some sort of, I'm seeking your advice, like what are some pitfalls and common, if one can call them mistakes, researchers who engage in multimodal studies with young children sometimes or often do, and how to guard against them in the future? What would be your knowledgeable, experiential response?
Well, I think sometimes if you're looking for something, you think you found it, and in fact, that's not quite what's happening. So I think it's always important to make sure that you're not trying to get a square peg into a round hole, as it were. That's number one, which is where the patience comes in, and the being with people for a long time, which I think is why ethnography and multimodality are so compatible, because you can gradually find the patterns of people's lives. But because I'm quite well known for my work on multimodality in young children, I am asked to review a lot of papers about which include the word multimodality. I often don't include the thinking that goes on behind it. So I think it's sometimes used as a bit of a buzzword without really understanding what's behind it. So I approach multimodality from a social semiotic perspective. That's not the only perspective. Other angles are possible. But there needs to be some theory behind it, I think, rather than just thinking, oh, I'll say it's multimodal, even though I don't really know why I'm saying that, other than the fact it's quite popular to do so.
Thank you. Thank you. We will cherish these important pieces of advice. We are now moving to segment 4, dealing with inclusion and voice.
Rosie, I feel so enriched by the conversation already, and I think you not only have given us some sound advice about research, but also are transforming our thinking, especially about digital literacies. So I think we're coming to a point in this conversation that is quite close to your heart, and it is the intersection between multimodality and inclusion. And my first question for you is, you have written about silent or less verbal children whose learning shows up beyond speech. How can educators recognize and value those signals?
Well, I think that educators have a lot of pressure on them, and they always have many, many things that they are trying to do. So it's actually, talk is a very tangible form of communication that is easy to latch onto. But I think that, like, the number one thing that I would encourage educators to do is to kind of like decenter talk, take talk out of the center of your attention. And to help you do that, you might find it useful to actually video your own practice, video the children. And if there's something that keeps happening in a certain area of your setting or with a certain child, then use video to capture different parts or different people in the same area or the child playing in different places, and then watch the video with colleagues and turn the sound down. So you can't listen to the talk. And then you can often see what's really happening. And that's a kind of it's not exactly a new way of reflecting on your own teaching and pedagogy and on children, but it's incredibly powerful to turn the sound down and just have a silent video that you're watching, and watch it with a colleague who you can think together about what's going on, and you're bound to see something, I think, that otherwise would pass unnoticed in the hustle and bustle of the everyday room.
Thank you. I love this idea of decentering talk. So continuing this line of thought, what does inclusive multimodal literacy look like for children with diverse abilities?
Well, I think obviously if children have some kind of impairment that means that they express themselves slightly differently to others, then it is the same as I've been saying all along. It's about attending to what children can do, about appreciating the capacities that every child has, rather than viewing all children through a kind of a normative lens of what you think they ought to be doing. So you have to kind of like scrub out everything we learn about child development in a way and just sort of rewind and say, okay, so what is this child actually doing? Because all children communicate in some way. They might be communicating, I don't want to communicate with you, but they'll be communicating it in a way that you need to understand. And I think this is also where tech can be very liberating, especially touch screens. It can be very liberating for children who don't have, they're termed as nonverbal, but I don't like that expression at all. That, they express themselves through eye gaze or some other kind of gestural movement if they have control over their bodies, is because touch screens can often enable children and indeed young adults with learning impairments to express things that are far more particular than they are able to without something that they can actually, touch and move. So in my own experience, I've witnessed quite profoundly impaired children actually select things on a screen in response to a question or a prompt, and their teacher has been amazed that they even understood the word. The teacher had never known they actually understood the word that was said because they didn't have a way of expressing their understanding. So I think that, tech can be liberating, but we need to just broaden our understanding of being generous towards children's capacities.
Wonderful. I love this idea of generosity.
We are now turning to segment 5, practice to policy.
Rosie, thank you. This has just been such a treat for us to have this much time with you, to have this conversation, and to talk about the various threads of your work that, of course, weave together, but also have distinctive characteristics. I'm going to ask about the connection between practice and policy, which I think is also close to your heart. My first question is, if you had 3 minutes with the Minister of Education, what would you change or ask them to change about early literacy policy to reflect a more multimodal reality?
Well, I think that's a really good question. And I think my goal would be to try and encourage a policymaker to recognize multiliteracies and to put multiliteracies at the heart of the curriculum, where it isn't in the UK, but it is in other early years curricula. So I think that would be my goal, but that's not what I would say, because I just think that is a complex construct, really, which is quite difficult to get across. So I think it's important. I think one approach could be to say that we need to value children's agency in their learning. And if we want to value their agency, then we need to recognize their capacities. And if we want to recognize their capacities, then, as I was saying, we need to, as I've said already, we need to focus on what children can do, not what is some normative expectation of what they might be able to do at a certain age or stage. So that also means appreciating that not all children are going to talk because they might not be confident in the setting. They might not be as confident as another child. And we need to appreciate the many different ways that children express themselves, and also the many different forms that literacies take in the contemporary world, which is now embracing a wider range of symbols and signifiers than it used to.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. So thoughtful, because I think then that gives us actionable things that we can reach for as well, right? And related to that, related to actionable, and really speaking to that strengths-based space that you were talking to, what professional learning moves teachers and shift from a more print-centric to multimodal pedagogies?
Well, I think all those lessons have already been rehearsed, really, in the Reggio Emilia approach and in the 100 languages of children. I think we know the answers to these questions, don't we? We know that children express themselves often, through many different ways, creatively or through their bodies. Quite often, if children spend a lot of their time outside in an early years setting, there isn't enough attention paid to what communication and what learning is going on in those outdoor settings. It's assumed they're just letting off steam or letting off energy, but in fact, there's an awful lot of complex social interaction going on. And so, just as we need to encourage more creative activities, more music, more acting, more stories, more children's storytelling through their playing together as well. Even their tiny little stories where they might be doing social play. Or, it's not unusual in the setting, is it, for somebody to be doing your hair while you're trying to focus. Somebody's pretending they're a hairdresser. We need to respect all of these different ways that children engage with the world, and to encourage them so that all children can blossom, can find a way of feeling that they are really achieving a lot and that they are realizing themselves in an early learning setting. And then once they realize that, then it opens up a wider world for them in the learning classroom. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, thank you. Yes, so much learning, so much joy talking with you. Thank you.
We are turning to segment field notes and some backstory. We have learned a lot about your wonderful research and thoughts and experiences about young children, multimodality and literacies. We seldom hear or are unable to read about research or things that didn't go as planned, that surprised the researcher. Are there anything in your history as a researcher and scholar that really has surprised you, and something unexpected happened when you engaged in researching young children, literacies and multimodality?
Yes, I think pretty much my whole career I've been surprised. Because that's really the joy of being an ethnographer. It's such a privilege to work with young children. And in terms of, you mentioned, the things that, haven't gone well as well. Yes, that happens too. Because if you spend a lot of time with children, you get to know them really well. And sometimes you see them being treated in ways that you think, oh, no, that's not right. Because they're being ignored. They're not being asked to come forward when you know that they're perfectly capable of doing something. And I think that can be a little bit tricky. So I always like to, whenever I start a study, I plan and I discuss with whoever the adult participants are. I sort of come to an agreement that if I think I can contribute something to their understanding of a child, are they okay with me sharing that with them? And so they always say yes, but then when it actually comes to it's a little bit different because one wouldn't want to ever pass judgment on another adult trying to cope in all the demands in an early years setting. But there, I think that's where video really helps. And if you have the parents' permission and the child's permission to share a little bit of video with, with practitioners, that can be really empowering because they say, oh my gosh, I hadn't realized that child could do that. I'm going to rethink what I'm doing. And so there's a way of turning things so that they work to a child's benefit. But in terms of surprises, I'm constantly surprised by just how clever and observant very young children are.
Oh, I really love your answer, and it really makes me also think the nature of ethnographic research with young children and with any people and communities, how it is actually constant learning and not only finding answers but also generating new questions that you did not know in advance. So I think you are so beautifully talking about these things and remind us all about the core of ethnographic research and its power. Power to be surprised.
Absolutely.
We also know that you have an amazing history and you have worked in several universities in the UK and engaging in your scholarship and wonderful research. You have worked at the Open University, University College London and Manchester Metropolitan University, and probably I miss something too. Can you help us understand how you feel these different cultural contexts, institutions, and their researchers have shaped and contributed to your thinking and career?
Well, yes, each group has been for a reason, but I think that beyond the institutions, one over your career, you gather a network of people, and the people move and change. So I feel as though I've actually had consistency in the people with whom I work. And that has sometimes meant moving institutions in order to get together in the groups of thinking together groups. So the Open University was a fantastic start to my academic career, where I was working with people who had guided my thinking as I was doing my PhD. And so that was a great honor to work in the Center for Language and Communication at the Open University. And it was absolutely fantastic. I love that institution. But then I had the opportunity to go and work more closely with Gunter Kress and with Carrie Jewett and others working in the field of multimodality. And in the early years, there's a very quite policy-oriented aspect to early years at the Institute of Education. And so that felt like the right time to move on to do that kind of role. And then towards the end of my career, I was invited to join the Education and Social Research Institute at Manchester Metropolitan University, where there are lots of people who were part of my network anyway, who I'd always wanted to work more closely with, who were really pushing the boundary on arts-based approaches and really rigorous ethics in research. And so that felt like the right place for me to do some exciting work towards the end of my career. And I've loved every single institution that I've worked.
Thank you so much. It's so a privilege to hear these backstories that never get published. So thank you for sharing. We are now moving to segment 7, looking ahead. Iris.
Rosie, I think we're feeling very lucky that perhaps now we have you in our networks too. But through this conversation, we have become more familiar with your wealth of knowledge and experience. But looking ahead, what questions in early communication research do you think are still under-researched?
Well, I think in the UK in particular, it's becoming a global phenomenon. The understanding of what literacy is has really narrowed with the drive towards particular structures like phonics. And I think that has taken away a lot of the joy from literacy. So I think that there is a wealth of research that still needs doing in multiliteracies in terms of what diverse ways children come to understand stories, to write their own stories. I think we need to bring back that kind of creativity into the literacies curriculum for a start. Obviously, there's a lot more work to be done on children's embodied meaning making. That is a very rich field as well. My recent work has focused on technology in the home and how very young children engage with technology. And there is so little known about under threes and technology. It more needs to be known about learning processes, interdisciplinary studies that are interrogating quite a lot of the scare stories that are going on, with coming out of brain science as well. So I think it's really important to have richer understandings of across multiple disciplinary disciplines of the role that technology plays with young children's bodies as well. This is a new thing. It's a new phenomenon, really, in the past 10 years or so, that it's become a big phenomenon. And it's just really ripe for, and it really needs interdisciplinary research where, people talk to each other across psychology, brain sciences, and arts as well. We need to have serious conversations about what's going on. Just stop all of the tendency towards scary headlines, which aren't really very helpful at all.
Thank you. I think this is a very important message. So, Rosie, if we redefine assessment multimodally in the early years, what might early years classroom look like in 10 years?
Well, I think we know the answer to that question, because early years educators know that children express themselves in many different ways. Malaguzzi called it 100 languages of children. And we know that by documenting children's interests, attending to the individual child and attending to groups of children's interests and documenting that with them, we know that kind of continuous assessment of children's learning is what works. So in some countries, they develop that documentation, call it learning journeys, but it's that continuous close observation of children, working with them, planning with them what you're going to do next. That's what works, and that immediately includes multimodality. So if we attend, as we earlier were discussing, to creative activities, to music making, to dance, to art, to storytelling, if we keep the curriculum rich by following children's lead in terms of their interests, then that's what the classroom should look like, far more child-led. But the problem is that we need to convince policymakers of that, because often what gets assessed are things that are accessible, and they're not always the things that really reflect the true deep learning that's happening, and the love of learning as well, which is so important.
Thank you, Rosie.
We are then turning to Harini. We don't have a segment name here. It's lightning round.
Thank you, Rosie. Just beautiful to hear you articulate so eloquently, I think, these understandings and to weave them together so beautifully. So thank you for that. Are you ready for a quick lightning round of quick questions? So one book every early years educator should read, outside of yours, of course.
Okay, so I can't say one book. I've got two that I would recommend. So one, because it was so transformational for me, would be, and because he's just so brilliant, was to read Gunter Kresser's Before Writing, Rethinking the Paths to Literacy. Because I think if you are not quite sure about why we all have to understand literacy as being more than words, I think that book gently explains exactly why, and you cannot finish the book and have the same view as policy would have you believe. So that's published in 1997. But a more recent book, which I think is so valuable, is Alison Clarke's Slow Knowledge and the Unhurried Child. That is so important for pedagogy. I think its subtitle is Time for Slow Pedagogy in Early Childhood Education, and that just about sums it up. So between those two books, I think you'd be set on the right path if you set off reading those two books.
Thank you. And yours, of course. A brilliant book. Too modest. Brilliant. Next one, a research method that you wish more people tried?
Ethnography.
Of course, with young children. A myth about toddlers and screens?
Oh, the biggest myth is that screen time is the thing we should be thinking about. Why is it screens and why is it time? That's the question that I now ask, having completed a big study recently on tech in the home. so much tech doesn't have a screen, like toys with tech embedded in them, lots of smart speakers and things like that. So we need to rethink whether screen is actually capturing what we're talking about or not. I'm convinced it isn't. So we need to build on that. And then time. It's not about time, it's about quality of interaction. It's always been about quality. So I think that screen and time is the biggest myth going on, because there are far more complex things going on. And it's very difficult to assess how much time is spent with digital media because it's everywhere.
Mm. Oh my God, that's very powerful. Rethinking screen and screen time as a concept. Thank you so much, Rosie. And finally, what does a multimodal classroom look like?
Well, every classroom is multimodal because it's, it's got multiple modes in it. But I think multimodal pedagogy is one where children are encouraged to express themselves in many, many different ways and to find their strengths in many different ways. And that means attending to the individual child over time, getting to know what that child's strengths are and encouraging that. And it might be music, it might be writing a story, it might be painting a picture, it might be singing, it might be playing outside, it might be running around and doing sport. But every child will have something through which they shine. And that's what a multimodal classroom looks like, one that treats all of these things in a more egalitarian way, rather than only valuing the storytelling or the story writing.
Beautiful. Thank you. Really asking us to look at all the gifts that.
That's exactly it. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosie.
Well, thank you so much for this inspiring conversation. We have learned a lot and are very grateful, Rosie, for your time and insight. This brings us to the end of today's episode with Professor Rosie Flewitt. We have heard how her work continues to expand our understanding of children's communication and literacies, reminding us that literacy is not only about print, but about the tapestry of multimodal expression. Thank you for joining us on Early Communication and Multimodality with Dr. Rosie Flewitt. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please visit our site where you can also learn more about Rosie's key publications and resources. Until next time, keep listening, keep learning, and keep reimagining what communication, young children's lives, digital literacies can be in today's world and in the future. Thank you.